Move it, Wheels. The shopping cart flew through the air, crashing against the supermarket wall with a deafening bang that made everyone stop and stare. Sarah Mitchell spun uncontrollably in her wheelchair, her groceries scattered across the floor like pieces of shattered dignity. The milk exploded, soaking her paralyzed legs. Apples rolled under shelves where she could never reach them. Bread crushed under the weight of public humiliation. Jake Morrison laughed loudly, his prison tattoos still fresh on his forearm. 3 weeks out of state penitentiary, and he'd already found a new target for his accumulated rage. Oops, didn't see you down there. Sarah Mitchell was 38 years old and never imagined that a simple grocery trip would become the worst day of her life. Multiple sclerosis had stolen her ability to walk 2 years ago, but it hadn't stolen her will to live. At least, not until this moment. Her hands trembled on the wheelchair armrests. Not because of the disease, because of the pure raw shame of being treated like garbage in front of dozens of people. Tony Reeves, Jake's partner in cruelty, cracked his knuckles loud enough for the entire store to hear. 5 years for armed robbery had hardened his heart to stone. Maybe next time you'll stay home where you belong, cripple. From the pharmacy aisle, David Mitchell watched his wife's shoulders curve inward, that defensive posture he knew all too well. For 3 years he had watched Ms. steal pieces of the woman he loved. But he had never felt as helpless as in this instant. Sarah's voice came out barely as a whisper, "I just want to buy food." Jake stepped closer, his shadow falling over the wheelchair like a physical threat. "What was that? Speak up, we can't hear you from down there." The crowd backed away, phones already recording what everyone assumed would be just another viral humiliation video. Another disabled person learning their place in a world that rarely made room for them. But then something unexpected happened. A woman emerged from the canned goods aisle. Small, maybe 5 feet 2 inches, wearing a simple white dress that seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dark hair pulled back modestly, reminiscent of ancient religious paintings. Serene face, almost supernatural, with eyes that held impossible depths. Store employees had noticed her before, always shopping alone, always polite, always seeming to appear exactly when someone needed help. They'd started calling her the Virgin Mary as a joke, but the nickname stuck because there was something about her presence that made even the rudest customers lower their voices. Jake didn't see her approach. He was too busy savoring Sarah's tears. But Tony did. His arrogant smile wavered as this strange woman walked directly toward them, her steps measured and purposeful. Something in her posture made his survival instincts scream danger, even though she looked incapable of hurting a fly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that cut through the supermarket noise like a blade. "I believe this lady was here first." Jake spun around, ready to mock this new victim, but the words died in his throat when his eyes met hers. For a moment, something flickered across his face, confusion, maybe even fear. David leaned forward, heart hammering. Who was this woman? And why did Jake Morrison, who survived 5 years in maximum security prison, suddenly look like he'd seen a ghost? The mysterious woman knelt gracefully and began collecting Sarah's scattered groceries, each movement flowing like water. Her white dress never seemed to get dirty despite the spilled milk and debris covering the floor. "Ma'am, you don't need to," Sarah began, but the woman's gentle smile silenced her. "We all need to," she replied softly, placing the apples back in Sarah's basket with hands that seemed to bring calm to everything they touched. Jake found his voice again, but it cracked slightly. "Lady, you better mind your own business before you get hurt." The woman stood slowly, still holding Sarah's shopping list, and turned to face him. What happened next would be replayed millions of times on social media, analyzed frame by frame, but no one would ever quite agree on what they actually saw. Because in that moment, standing under the fluorescent glow of Henderson's Market, this small woman in white no longer looked human. She looked like something much, much older. And infinitely more dangerous. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected courage in the most ordinary places, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about strength, faith, and the mysterious ways justice finds its voice. What no one in that store realized was that this wasn't the first time Jake and Tony had encountered this woman. And the reason Jake's face went white wasn't fear, it was recognition. Because 3 weeks ago, on his last day in prison, she had whispered something in his ear that was about to come true in ways he never could have imagined. Jake stepped back, but his ex-convict arrogance fought against something he couldn't name. "You don't know who you're messing with, princess." The woman in white tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Jake Morrison. Prisoner number 47291. Released 3 weeks and 2 days ago. Jake's blood ran cold. How did she know his prisoner number? How did she know when he got out? His eyes narrowed. Prison survival instincts kicked into overdrive. Tony laughed nervously. So what? Anyone can look that up online. But his voice shook. Because he too felt something wrong about this woman. Something that made his old prison fight scars throb like warnings. Ah, Tony Reeves, she continued, turning to him with that same serene smile that never reached her eyes. 5 years for armed robbery. Your mother still prays for you every night at 11:47. She lights a white candle and asks for you to find your way back home. Tony went pale. His mother had never spoken to anyone about her nightly prayers. She lived 3 states away and didn't even own a phone. How did this stranger know such intimate details? David watched from afar, every fiber of his being trembling with helpless rage. For 2 years, he had watched his wife fight a disease that slowly stole her body. Physical therapy, expensive medications, sleepless nights when the pain was unbearable. And now, 2 criminals were humiliating the woman he loved in front of a crowd that recorded instead of helped. His hands clenched into fists. David Mitchell, 42-year-old accountant, had never fought in his life. But something primitive was awakening inside him. Something he didn't recognize. Listen here, Saint, Jake growled, recovering his bravado. I don't know what cheap trick you're pulling, but you better back off before you what? The woman's voice remained soft, but something changed in the air around her. The fluorescent lights flickered. The air conditioning stopped working. Even the store's background music ceased. Sarah looked up, tears still streaming down her face, but now there was something more. Hope. For the first time in years, someone had placed themselves between her and the world's cruelty. You don't understand, Sarah whispered, addressing the mysterious woman. They'll hurt you. I've been through this before. People like me, we're easy targets. The woman knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair, her white dress somehow remaining spotless on the dirty floor. People like us, she corrected gently, are exactly why I'm here. Jake's patience snapped. Enough of this weird religious crap. He grabbed a can of soup from a nearby shelf and hurled it at the woman's head. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in. But the can never reached its target. It stopped mid-air, hovering 3 inches from her face, spinning slowly like it was suspended by invisible strings. For 5 seconds that felt like eternity, the entire store fell completely silent. Then the can gently floated down and placed itself back on the shelf. Tony's face went white as paper. What the hell was that? But Jake wasn't done. Prison had taught him that showing weakness meant becoming prey. He lunged forward, aiming to shove the woman aside and finish what he started with Sarah. His hands passed right through her. Like she wasn't there at all. The store erupted in screams. Phones dropped. People backed away in terror. But the woman simply stood up, brushed an imaginary speck of dust from her white dress, and looked directly into Jake's eyes. Your time is up, she said quietly. Both of you. David pushed through the crowd, his protective instincts finally overriding his shock. But when he reached Sarah's side, the woman was already gone. Vanished like she had never been there. Except for one thing, Sarah's scattered groceries were now neatly arranged in her cart, and pinned to her shopping list was a small white note that simply read, "Fear not. Justice comes to those who wait." Jake stumbled backward, his tough guy mask cracking completely. Because somewhere deep in his criminal mind, he remembered a white figure visiting him in his prison cell exactly 21 days ago. A figure who had promised him that his victims would be protected. And now he was beginning to understand that some promises are made by forces far more powerful than the law. David Mitchell stared at the white note pinned to his wife's shopping list, his hands shaking as he read those words again. Fear not. Justice comes to those who wait. But waiting had never felt like an option when the woman you love was being terrorized. That evening, while Sarah slept fitfully, haunted by the day's humiliation, David sat in his home office surrounded by something that would have shocked anyone who knew him. Legal documents, police reports, prison records, all meticulously organized across his desk like a war room. Because David Mitchell wasn't just a mild-mannered accountant. For 15 years, he'd been the financial investigator for the district attorney's office, the man who followed money trails that put criminals behind bars. He'd taken early retirement when Sarah got sick, but his skills hadn't dulled. They'd sharpened. His phone buzzed. A text from Jake Morrison's number. Somehow the bastard had gotten his contact information. Your crippled wife got lucky today. Next time that crazy woman won't be around to save her. David's jaw clenched. These idiots had no idea who they were threatening, or what they'd just walked into. He opened his laptop and began typing. Within minutes, he'd accessed Jake Morrison's parole records, employment history, known associates. Tony Reeves' file came next. Then he dug deeper, bank records, credit reports, social media footprints. Everything. What he found made him smile for the first time in days. Jake Morrison owed $12,000 in back child support. Tony Reeves had violated parole twice in the past month, missed check-ins that somehow hadn't been reported yet. Both men were living in a rundown motel that was currently under federal investigation for drug trafficking. But David needed more than paperwork. He needed eyes and ears. The next morning, he called Detective Maria Santos, his former partner from the DA's office. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp and professional until she heard his voice. David Mitchell. I wondered when you'd resurface, Maria said, her tone softening. Heard about Sarah's diagnosis. How is she? Not good, Maria. And yesterday it got worse. He told her everything, the grocery store incident, the humiliation, the threats. But he didn't mention the mysterious woman. Some things were too strange to put into official reports. Maria was quiet for a long moment. These two pieces of garbage threatened a disabled woman in public? With witnesses. Video evidence too. Half the store was recording. Send me everything you have on them. I'll make some calls. But David was already 3 steps ahead. While they spoke, his computer pinged with an encrypted message from an old contact, someone who owed him favors from a major embezzlement case years ago. The message contained something beautiful, complete surveillance footage from the motel where Jake and Tony were staying. They were dealing drugs. Small time, but enough to send them back to prison for a very long time. That afternoon, David received another text from Jake. Tell your wife to stay home tomorrow. We know where you live. This time, David texted back, No, Jake. You have no idea where you are. Jake's response came instantly, What's that supposed to mean, paper pusher? David smiled as he typed his reply, Ask your parole officer. Oh wait, you might want to call a lawyer first. 3 hours later, Jake Morrison's phone exploded with notifications. Photos of him selling drugs, time-stamped and geotagged. His parole officer's number. His ex-wife's lawyer demanding the $12,000 he owed. A court summons for violation of parole terms. Tony got the same treatment. Both men's phones also received one more message, from an untraceable number. The lady in the wheelchair has friends you can't see. Stop now, or discover what real punishment looks like. By evening, David had compiled a 47-page dossier on both men. Every crime, every violation, every person they'd hurt. Detective Santos had filed official complaints. Federal agents were preparing warrants. But as David closed his laptop, he noticed something strange. On his desk, beside all his carefully organized evidence, was a single white flower. A lily, fresh as if it had just been picked. He hadn't put it there. Sarah was asleep upstairs. The doors were locked. Yet somehow, it felt like a sign. A blessing on the work he was about to complete. Outside, Jake Morrison was pacing in his motel room, paranoid and sweating. Tony sat on the bed, staring at his phone screen full of evidence that could destroy his life. How did they get all this? Tony whispered. Jake's hand shook as he tried to call the number that had sent the photos, but it went straight to a message in a calm, familiar voice. You were warned. Last chance. Neither man slept that night. And they had no idea that their nightmare was just beginning. What Jake and Tony couldn't see was that David Mitchell wasn't working alone anymore. The mysterious woman from the grocery store had left more than just a flower on his desk. She'd left him something that would turn 2 small-time criminals into the subjects of the largest sting operation the county had seen in years. And the countdown to their reckoning had already begun. The raid happened at 5:47 a.m., exactly 72 hours after Jake Morrison had shoved Sarah's wheelchair. FBI agents, DEA officers, and local police surrounded the Sunrise Motel like a hurricane of justice that had been building for days. Jake woke up to his door exploding off its hinges, federal agents flooding his room with weapons drawn. "Jake Morrison, you're under arrest for distribution of controlled substances, violation of parole, and federal racketeering charges." In the adjacent room, Tony Reeves was getting the same treatment. Both men were dragged outside in handcuffs, their drug operation exposed, their freedom evaporating like morning mist. But the real shock came when Detective Maria Santos read them their rights. "You're also being charged with assault and harassment of a disabled person, captured on video evidence and witnessed by 47 people." Jake's face went white. "This is about that woman in the wheelchair? Are you serious?" "Dead serious. And there's more." Santos held up her tablet, showing bank records, communication logs, and surveillance footage. "Threatening a federal witness." "Yes, Mr. Morrison. Sarah Mitchell's husband used to work for the DA's office. You threatened a cop's family." Tony started hyperventilating. "We didn't know." "How were we supposed to know?" "Know what?" "That disabled people deserve basic human dignity." Santos' voice was ice. "Or that actions have consequences." As the patrol cars pulled away, David Mitchell stood across the street, watching from behind tinted windows. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Santos, "Package delivered. They're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum." But when David turned to share the news with Sarah, he found her staring out their car window with tears streaming down her face. Not tears of joy, tears of something deeper. "She's here," Sarah whispered. David followed her gaze and felt his heart stop. The woman in white stood near the motel entrance, watching the arrests with that same serene expression. But now, in the early morning light, she looked different. More real. More human. She walked directly to their car, her white dress pristine despite the chaos around her. David rolled down the window, his investigative mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Justice has been served," she said simply, her voice carrying that same otherworldly calm. But this was never about them. Sarah reached through the window and grasped the woman's hand. "I don't understand. Who are you?" The woman smiled, and for a moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a tired middle-aged Latina woman with calloused hands and worn shoes. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez. I clean offices downtown. My daughter Sophia has cerebral palsy. She's 12. David's mouth fell open. "You're not. I mean, we thought." "You thought I was someone else," Carmen nodded. "People see what they need to see. But I'm just a mother who knows what it feels like to watch the world treat your child like they don't matter." Sarah was crying harder now, but these were different tears. "The things you did in the store. The confloating, disappearing." Carmen's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes when we're desperate enough, we see miracles. Sometimes we need to believe in something bigger than ourselves. And sometimes," she reached into her purse and pulled out a small device, "a little technology helps create the illusion people need to find their courage." She showed them a small remote control. "Magnets in the shelf. Projection system. My nephew works in special effects for movies. Taught me a few tricks." David stared at her in amazement. "But how did you know about their prison records? Their personal information?" Carmen's smile turned slightly sad. "Because I clean the parole office every night. I hear things. See things. And when I saw what they did to your wife, I knew someone had to act." She handed Sarah a business card. "I run a support group for families dealing with disabilities. We meet Tuesday nights at St. Mary's Church. We look out for each other because nobody else will." As Carmen walked away, David called after her. "Why? Why did you help us?" She paused without turning around. "Because 3 months ago, those same 2 men made my Sophia cry in the grocery store. They called her retard, and knocked her communication device out of her hands. She hasn't spoken since." David felt something break open in his chest. "Carmen, wait." But when he looked up, she was gone. Not disappeared, just walked around the corner like any normal person would. Because that's exactly what she was. A normal person who had decided to do something extraordinary. Sarah squeezed his hand. "David, we need to go to that church meeting Tuesday night." He nodded, understanding that their lives had just changed in ways that had nothing to do with arrests or justice. They'd found something more valuable than revenge. They'd found community. As the patrol cars faded into the distance, David realized the most powerful revelation wasn't about Carmen's identity or the sophisticated sting operation. It was about something much simpler and more profound. Sometimes the most extraordinary acts of courage come from the most ordinary people, and sometimes justice arrives wearing cleaning gloves and carrying a heart full of love for children who just want to belong in a world that doesn't always make room for them. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell rolled her wheelchair through the doors of St. Mary's Church with confidence that hadn't existed before that day in the grocery store. The Tuesday night support group had grown from 8 families to over 40, and Sarah had become its co-leader alongside Carmen Rodriguez. "Tonight we have new families joining us," Sarah announced to the circle of parents, children, and caregivers. "Remember, everyone here understands what it means to fight for dignity in a world that doesn't always see our worth." In the corner, 12-year-old Sofia Rodriguez worked quietly on her tablet, her communication device restored and upgraded thanks to donations from the community that had rallied around Carmen's story. She looked up and smiled at Sarah, then typed a message that appeared on the screen: "Thank you for being brave." David stood at the back of the room, watching his wife facilitate discussions about accessibility, advocacy, and hope. The woman who had once whispered, "I just want to buy food," now spoke with authority about legal rights and community organizing. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in state prison, Jake Morrison sat in his cell serving year 2 of a 15-year sentence. His cellmate had just finished reading him a letter from his ex-wife's lawyer, another garnishment order for the child support he'd never paid. Tony Reeves occupied the cell next door, both men having learned that prison was much harder the second time around. Their drug operation had been bigger than anyone realized. The FBI had used their case to crack a multi-state trafficking ring, sending dozens of dealers to federal prison. What started as bullying a disabled woman had exposed a criminal network that had poisoned communities for years. But the real transformation happened back at St. Mary's Church. Carmen approached the microphone, her cleaning uniform replaced by a simple blue dress. 6 months ago, I watched 2 men humiliate a woman in a wheelchair. I could have walked away like everyone else did. Instead, I decided to act. She looked directly at the families gathered in the circle. I used movie tricks to make them think I was supernatural. But the real miracle wasn't the floating can or the disappearing act. The real miracle was what happened after, a community that decided to stand together. David stepped forward. "Carmen taught us that extraordinary courage doesn't require superpowers. It just requires ordinary people deciding that enough is enough." Sarah wheeled her chair to the center of the circle. "Jake Morrison and Tony Reeves thought they could intimidate us because I'm disabled. What they discovered is that attacking one of us means facing all of us." The room erupted in applause, but Sarah raised her hand. "The most important lesson isn't about revenge or even justice. It's about what we build afterward. This community, these friendships, this support system, that's what real victory looks like." A young mother in the back row raised her hand. "My son has autism. Last week, kids at school were making fun of him. But this time, I didn't just complain to the principal. I organized the other parents. We created an inclusion program." More hands went up. More stories of courage inspired by that day in Henderson's Market. The video of the grocery store incident had been viewed 12 million times, but more importantly, it had sparked similar support groups in 37 cities. Carmen smiled as she watched families connecting, sharing resources, and building networks of mutual aid. "Sometimes God works through grocery store security cameras and special effects equipment," she said quietly to David. "Sometimes angels wear cleaning uniforms and carry magnets in their purses." As the meeting ended, Sarah received a text message from Detective Santos. Jake Morrison's parole was just denied. Tony Reeves got 5 more years added for attempting to intimidate witnesses from prison. They'll be old men before they see freedom again. Sarah showed the message to David, then deleted it without responding. Some chapters of their lives were simply closed forever. Walking out to their car, David put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Jake Morrison tried to make you feel small in a grocery store. 6 months later, you're leading a movement that's changing lives across the country." Sarah looked up at him. Carmen was right about miracles. Sometimes we become what people need us to be. And sometimes the most broken among us become the strongest. They drove home past Henderson's Market, where a new sign hung in the window. This store proudly supports accessibility and inclusion for all customers. The manager had implemented disability awareness training for all employees and installed a direct line to local advocacy groups. At home, Sarah's laptop showed 43 emails from families requesting help starting support groups in their communities. Her story had traveled far beyond that grocery store, becoming a beacon for anyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. The last email was from Sophia Rodriguez. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm doing a presentation at school about heroes. Can I use your picture? My mom says you and my mom proved that the best revenge is becoming too strong to need it. Sarah closed the laptop and smiled. Jake Morrison and Tony Reeves had thought they were humiliating a weak woman in a wheelchair. Instead, they had awakened something much more powerful, a community that refused to let anyone stand alone. Sometimes justice comes through the courts. Sometimes it comes through prison sentences. But the sweetest justice of all is when the people who tried to break you discover they've only made you stronger. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide that kindness matters more than cruelty, and that standing together is always stronger than standing alone.